I
We're
think
like,
you
we're a
would
little
be
too
better
close.
off with like a hardcore right-wing populist than you would with like a Warren Knight liberal.
I think
I
that's
can't,
true.
I do actually have a really hard time now feeling anything remotely positive about hardcore Israel supporters, not just politically, but personally as well. Oh my God, how is it that I'm waking up and thinking Tucker Carlson is doing good work or agreeing with him? And it's like, bitch, I've been telling you these things for years and you called me a fascist over it. The rhetoric about America first is so blatantly inconsistent with America's enduring alliance with Israel. That to me shows a very impressive kind of discipline. So yeah, I do find his candidacy exciting. Matt represented their politics, was this very like important voice and a person who believed that he has changed and they feel kind of betrayed. I know there's a lot of people who felt that about me. I think there are people who feel that about you. And you're kind of...
Me? Hey, Glenn.
Hello, Briahna, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good, just one sec.
Yeah, sure. But it was irritating because they were like ignoring all of like the substantive economic reasons why people don't have time to hang out, people don't have jobs, like, and like fetishizing the idea of doing your laundry at a laundromat because you could like meet your partner conceivably at the laundromat, and like
Oh,
saying
that's
people were
so
like,
glamorous to meet your partner
yeah.
at the laundromat.
I'm telling her about this episode of do you know Esther Perel?
No.
She's like a psychologist and like a relationship lady. She's like French or Belgian or Francophone, but Belgian. Anyway, she's like, you know, Brene Brown.
Yeah.
She's like that, but a little bit more substantive, I would say, and less irritating. But she was being irritating on this episode.
I mean, all these like advice and self-help podcasts always at some point become cringe. And like, I do think it's so funny, like you're gonna meet your partner at the laundromat. It's such like an easy solution. Like, you know how people look when they go to the laundromat, like they're wearing sweatshirts and like skinky shirts, and you're like carrying detergent in your dirty clothes. It's gonna be like,
Exactly.
oh hi.
Exactly. And it's hot and it's sweaty. And you're probably there. They were basically not, I won't say dumping on people who long for an in-unit washer, but they were like, you're missing out on the magic of the meet cute and the connections you could have in the laundromat. And like people are busy and they're poor. And nobody wants to be in that effing laundromat. And like,
Like glamour, like
incredibly out
romanticizing
of
the
touch.
laundromat is the kind of thing you do when you don't actually go to the laundromat anymore.
Exactly. Exactly. Or like you hear like the Obamas talk about like I miss going to the grocery store or whatever. Like it was so out of touch. And then as like a socialist, I'm thinking, I mean, I appreciate the idea that we don't use communal third spaces and that we don't have time to go to those communal third spaces. But to me, it's like, okay, free up people's time, make it so they have more income, make it so they don't have to work multiple jobs, make it so that they don't have
Right.
such overwhelming childcare responsibilities. Like, and the whole conversation by these two like ostensibly compassionate liberals, that was her and Trevor Noah, was completely devoid of any of that lens. And it was irritating to me because I really
When
like
do you
Esther
think the last
Perel.
time Trevor Noah went to the laundromat?
Exactly. Exactly. And he's talking about his relationship drama and he's like, oh, how do I meet someone like the apps? I know intellectually that I would love to have a meet cute in real life, but I find myself on the apps and swiping and like, what am I going to do? Like, woe is me. He's been dating like Hollywood models when he should obviously be dating
Obviously, I
me.
know. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I mean, it's been said. It's been said. I
This
can
is
fix him, is what I'm saying.
this is not going to be the unexpected start of our conversation like the last time when we were giggling about Luigi Mangione, and it turned out that was the beginning of the show.
Who can say, Glenn? Who can
You
say?
never know on this podcast. It could be, the start could just be anytime. You get lured into like feeling like you're speaking in private, and then it turns out it gets broadcast to the world.
But that's the thing, people, and Armand's observed this, I'm sure, over the years, people tend to be, if not at the beginning, their most kind of natural and normal selves. Then after we wrap, half the time we'll have this amazing hour-long conversation where folks get real and like let their
Totally,
guard down and
totally.
like lose their podcast voice. And it's hard not to want to capture that.
No, I get that, but yeah, we don't really have that. Our like relationship is too, our like dynamic is too organic to like go into podcast mode, like stiff podcast mode. You know, all
No, because
presentational and like.
yeah, but also you're a professional, Glenn. Like sometimes people say, I want you to get your mom on, Briahna. You talk about her so often. But God bless her. Like anytime I've tried to record her, she like stiffens up and turns into an automaton. It's so weird. Not
Yeah.
everybody just has that ability to like lock into some genuine version of themselves and
Right.
stick the landing.
Especially if you're not accustomed to it. And you don't have like
Yeah,
I think also if you don't have like a confidence in it, like how other people are going to perceive you, or you just don't care, like one of the two, then yeah, of course you're going to get very self-conscious.
Glenn, do you listen to any kind of self-helpy like, advice podcast? Like, what's your guilty pleasure consumption habit?
Actually, there are like a couple of reality shows that I watch. It's mostly David's fault. He got me hooked on RuPaul, and I
Okay.
do watch that. And then I also like Survivor. So those are like the two guilty pleasures that I would never admit to liking. And if this is recorded and then shown, I'll just claim it's like a deep fake or something. But I actually can't stand those self-helpy podcasts or like relationship podcasts because they're just so abstract. There's never any vibrancy to them. There's
Okay,
no.
so yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I don't want to like condemn everybody, including people I've never listened to. I'm like maybe there are some good ones. Um, but I just find in general like it's just very clinical, like, and I do think one-on-one conversations like universalized advice can have very limited utility. Maybe it has some, but generally people have their own challenges that have to be addressed, and there's not like one size fits all self-help.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the reason I like to listen to Estelle Perel is that she talks, it's like a therapy session with an individual person for, 50 minutes and you just get to listen
Is she
to
a
it.
therapist?
Yeah. And it's she prompts people to call in with a relatively discrete issue that they could sort of get through in about an hour. It's like do you know that show Couples Therapy on I don't know, some Showtime maybe? And it's the same thing. It's like, but they follow people over the course of weeks and weeks in their
Right,
relationship.
but that's what I'm saying, like that. But what you're saying is not just like somebody looking into the camera, like giving pontificating advice. It's like having a one-on-one therapy session, which that I think can be illuminating.
Yeah,
Like that's what I mean.
it
Like she's
often is.
focused on like one person as opposed to, just giving advice like in general or theorizing or whatever.
Yeah, it often is. And I think that's part of why I was so irritated by this episode with Trevor Noah, because they clearly like talking to each other. I think the first time he was on the show, they were doing like South by or some conference together. And then they clicked. And so they've been having successive conversations with each other.
Do you find him like a particularly deep or substantive person?
That's such a hard question because this could really mess me up if my meet cute in the laundromat does in fact happen with him someday. um, okay. I root for him, but I have from time to time felt that, especially when he was earlier in his career, he was cast during the Obama era as someone who could opine on American racial politics because he's Black. And there's this idea that like the South African experience is a close enough one-to-one. And I often at that time felt like he was missing the mark when talking about Black American issues in particular. And more recently, that is less of a focus because we're now like kind of out of the Obama era. And maybe also because he's just been here longer. I feel like I alluded to before, like all of this like class of like liberal commentariat, that while he's better than the average, he doesn't really get into material issues, and also is not exactly going to give you a sharp criticism of left politico, like liberal politicos. He's just not going to. So I think he's intelligent and he gets like to a certain point, but then it doesn't go any farther.
Right. I mean, I think that's one of the most commonplace
him.
limitations. And yeah, I guess you assume he can provide more. I'm not sure I do. I remember seeing a clip of him, and this may have contaminated my view of him for quite some time, where he was still in South Africa and he was speaking as part of his act to a South African audience. And it was he was like attacking poor people and people who were rioting, and from the like attacking the left from this like centrist view, almost trying to curry favor with the South African establishment in a way that he would never do now. And you know, people evolve, people grow, blah blah blah. But it just seemed to me like he was very chameleon-like in that the stuff he was saying then, and it wasn't like when he was 20. It was like pretty recent.
Yeah. Yeah, I can
You know,
see that.
and I'm not like
I
it's
can
not
see
even
that.
like a difference of opinion. It's like a whole different. It's like a different image, like a different ethos, a different mindset, like that he was presenting.
No, I definitely have
Like,
seen clips. I've definitely seen clips like that. I've seen him
Yeah.
be almost classist in clips. I've seen that as well.
Right,
And then there are these other moments where there are these like after the show segments, you know, the Trevor Noah like after hours. I don't know what they do, but you know, they keep recording and he's engaging with the audience and stuff. And sometimes he can be so like soulful and willing to go there on usually more apolitical topics that are about like a willingness. It's kind of, I feel like I low key like.
I feel like your crush on him
like
is making you way more generous to him than you ordinarily would be.
I mean, yeah, 100%. And it's not even like a
Totally.
real crush. It's not even a real crush. I don't even find him that attractive. I just sometimes find myself searching my mind for like, why do I have trouble dating? Like, there's an argument that women all, especially my age group, to lower their standards. There's a counter argument that I should raise my standards. And that if I reached for the moon, I would find myself in something like a relationship where there wasn't this kind of competitiveness or sense of insecurity because the other person was so accomplished. You know what I'm saying, Glenn?
But where do you find your standards too elevated, like in terms of physical appearance or accomplishment or social capital or status or like what?
I honestly don't think I'm picky at all. Like, I think the one thing that I am picky about is sort of not just, I mean, like, there's no way you can say these things without sounding like an asshole, but like intelligence. Like, I want to feel understood and seen. Like, I need you
I don't
to
think
really
that's
have the
that
capacity
hard.
to understand
I think
me.
there are enough people, because then you do have to return to the question, like, why do you have so much trouble dating if your standards are so reasonable?
Well, Glenn, it's, you know, it's like they're not like Mensa trees growing in Central Park, you know?
They're not?
No, I mean, and then I do have to be attracted to them. I'm not one of these girls that's like, you gotta be over 6 foot. I'm not that girl. I'm not a height queen. You know, I do prefer a sort of athletic build, but I've dated outside of that. And I'm not saying like a gym rat. I like a skinny guy. Like, it's just, you know, like I like a runner. Just because I like
So you can hang out at marathons. You should hang out at marathons.
I mean, I'm planning, like, I've been dabbling in run clubs like every other thirsty millennial in Washington, D.C. And, you know, we'll see how that goes. That's my meet cute. That's my laundromat is the run club. But yeah, I do feel like, I don't know, it's a great question that I've been exploring with my new therapist. I do feel like, politics has increasingly become an issue. I mean, are you really surprised?
That's interesting. So you couldn't date someone who has even moderately different political views, let alone radically different political views?
They have an issue with me.
Yeah. Yeah.
They had an issue with me. I had a thing with a guy who like had a meltdown because I referenced an episode that I did about RFK's like vaccine skepticism back in the day. And I had an epidemiologist come on, kind of who the right trusts. What's his name? Oh God, what's the guy's name? South Asian guy from Cornell, I think. Anyway, and I brought him on because he was someone that was like a COVID skeptic that the right liked, right? Like they had credibility, but who had been critical of RFK Jr. on vaccines and autism.
For his vaccine skepticism,
so I'm like,
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
so I'm like, great. Like, I'm not going to bring in like Dr. Hotez or whatever his name was that no one will listen to because he doesn't have any credibility with this crowd that needs to be spoken, you know. So I had him on. And then I informed myself as to RFK Jr.'s arguments and like mooted the case with him, right? And then I accidentally was winning some of these points.
On behalf of RFK, you were making the pro RFK point?
Yes. I was just like, okay, here's what he says. I read the study. Like, tell me why this is wrong. And in not all, but in some of the instances, this guest was like, I got to tell you, you know, I don't have a lot of pushback on that one. And so I brought this up. This was like many dates in. I thought we had like rapport and understanding of each other. And I thought it was a safe space for me to like make reference to this kind of like weird thing that had happened on an episode. And he became convinced that I was like, a vaccine, not in a healthy,
and he was imagining the little
kind of
kids that you were going to have who were going to be exposed to polio because of your vaccine, your anti-vax.
Exactly. He was imagining our iron lung child. That we were going to start a measles outbreak in Washington, D.C. because, and there's nothing I can do to disavow him of that fact. So yeah, this stuff comes up. Like a lot of like liberal Warren Lib type guys who it's like familiarity breeds contempt.
I think you would be better off with like a hardcore, like right-wing populist than you would with like a Warrenite liberal. I think
that's true.
I know. I think so too.
I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I think as a relative metric, that would be true. Yeah.
I used to always hate this idea that you that you would sacrifice friendships or especially like romantic partners or dating possibilities over political differences. But I do actually have a really hard time now feeling anything remotely positive about hardcore Israel supporters, not just politically, but personally as well. And now I feel myself sort of doing the thing that I've always said human beings shouldn't do, which is venerate and prioritize politics over human relations. But to me, it just seems like such a moral litmus test that I have trouble just isolating that as some political difference.
See, Glenn, that's fascinating. There's echoes of what you're saying in a conversation I had with Glenn Lowry about a month ago. Where did you see his?
I think I saw some of that. Yeah, I saw his Tucker thing where he talked about being fired from the Manhattan Institute over his Israel critiques.
Yeah, so I had him on right after. And
I did see that. I saw him with you too.
Yeah, it was kind of fascinating that for some reason this issue, even for him as someone who is one of the most famous sort of, I don't know if he describes himself as a conservative, but a black person on the other side of a lot of these kind of race and culture issues than most black people, found himself after decades and a whole life of this sort of thinking and scholarship, engaging on these issues. Israel, in the reaction from his own sort of camp about this issue, like forced him to reconsider how he's been thinking about race in other contexts for his entire life. And it is fascinating to me that this seems to be the third rail. I mean, look.
Well, but is it that hard to understand? I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's mostly about the fact that, at least from my perspective, this is one of the most inexcusable, relentless, horrific, enduring atrocities I've ever been aware of or have ever witnessed or I've ever seen. And we are actually seeing it. Every day you see it. You don't just hear about it in the sense that you see it, you actually see it. And you're surrounded by people who aren't bothered by it in the slightest, who actually want it to continue, who want to continue to support it and cheer it and arm it and finance it.
Yeah.
And that's when I think it transcends a moral issue, like when you're watching kids being blown up every day and then someone next to you is okay with that or even more than okay with that, actively justifying it. It's very hard to not let that contaminate other kinds of assessments of people beyond just political ones.
This issue does seem to have like fractured the conservative media space and political space in a really interesting way, where you've got, Joe Rogan and Theo Vaughn and Candace Owens offering very sympathetic perspectives.
That whole thing where kicking people out of Palestine is such an inconvenient story today. When people are talking about Israel and Palestine and the conflict, they do not like talking about what happened in 1948.
Yeah, and I think it's important. Like I think for us to reach some kind of peace, which is really hard to talk about when you see what's happening in Gaza, even yesterday.
The people that were waiting for food got bombed.
Yeah,
it's insane, and no one wants to talk about it.
Right, but if you
do talk about it, you're anti-Semitic, which is so strange. Like I don't know how they wrangled that.
It's been hard for me in tech because probably the only prominent Palestinian in tech that is talking about it, and so that's.
Do you get pushback?
Oh, of course. Lots of
what do
pushback.
people say to you?
anti-Semitic.
How is it anti-Semitic?
I criticize the state of Israel. Our position, every moderate Palestinian that I know, their position is like two-state solution. We need the emergence of the state of Palestine, and that's the best way to ending the occupation is the best way to guarantee peace and security even for Israelis.
Palestine sympathetic perspectives. Candace Owens being a real advocate, not just saying like, how sad is this, but like really leading the charge on condemning Israel's genocide. And at the same time, you have others who seem to be really firmly sticking their ground, and not just like the usual suspects who have long been
like the Ben Shapiro's,
but what do you make of like Megyn Kelly and some of these others who, seem to be staying the course? I mean, what do you think is going on?
Well, it's interesting because obviously I know a lot of these people better than I ever thought I would and than I did previously. And I have to say, I've been trying to get people on the left to see these wedges that I saw growing among the American right in a way that presented a lot of opportunities. And of course, most people did not want to hear that. They didn't see it. They didn't believe it. They viewed it as apologia for fascism or whatever. And now, it's so funny to watch people, like kind of standard liberals, when Tucker Carlson did that thing with Ted Cruz, or when he spoke out so vehemently against bombing Iran. And they're like, oh my God, how is it that I'm waking up and thinking Tucker Carlson is like a good journalist or doing good work or agreeing with him? And it's like, bitch, I've been telling you these things for years and you called me a fascist over it. But I do think those divisions are very real. And I mean, it's not hard to understand why, because when Trump ran in 2016, his whole political image and presentation was, and he had to do it, whether it was by conviction or necessity, it was by necessity for sure, he was running against the Bush machine. And his only chance was to run against longstanding GOP dogma on foreign and domestic policy, or economic policy at least. And Steve Bannon was the architect of that campaign, who hates the Bush family, hates Republican dogma, hates, neocons, all of that, and is a real economic populist, for better or for worse, at least in his arguments. And so it automatically created this breach. And I do think you're seeing it. And I think there's like an older generation. I think it's very generational. So Megyn Kelly is somebody who, worked at Fox most of her career after she became a journalist, when she was done being a lawyer, and was steeped in this kind of war on terror, us versus them, Republican establishment, foreign policy mentality that, of course, is going to favor Israel, because that has been the bipartisan consensus. And it's just never something she really jettisoned or questioned. It's just part of her worldview. But you see younger MAGA people, I think in particular, who haven't been feeding on this connection to Israel, this idea that somehow we're supposed to be loyal to Israel. And the America First message, by definition, was supposed to be about, we don't fund other countries' wars, we don't get involved in other countries' wars. And the inconsistency between that belief and how we treat Israel is so blatant that, it's kind of like this Epstein thing, where they want to defend Trump, but they fed on this Epstein extremism and conspiracy for so long. They promised their own, followers, their own viewers, their own readers, that all this was going to come out, it was going to be devastating and incriminating, and anybody trying to conceal it was corrupt and protecting pedophiles. And so even though they want to defend Trump, it's just too much of a inconsistency. There's too much irreconcilability for them to sweep it under the rug, at least for the moment. And a lot of that has been true about Israel as well. I mean, the rhetoric about America First is so blatantly inconsistent with America's enduring alliance with Israel, which is what Washington and Jefferson both warned against, these enduring alliances that would drag America into other people's wars and into other people's rhythms. That, of course, it creates that wedge. And for people who really believe in the America First ideology, which doesn't include Megyn Kelly. I mean, she wasn't a big Trump fan. I think she's part of that crowd that really liked Ron DeSantis,
he said she was bleeding
was
from
promising.
her whatever.
I don't have a lot of respect for Megyn Kelly. She's a lightweight. And, she came out there reading her little script and trying to, be tough and be sharp. And when you meet her, you realize she's not very tough and she's not very sharp. She's Zippo. Well, I just don't respect her as a journalist. I have no respect for her. I don't think she's very good. I think she's highly overrated. But when I came out there, what am I doing? I'm not getting paid for this. I go out there and, they start saying, lift up your arm if you're going to, I didn't know there'd be 24 million people. I figured, but I knew it was going to be a big crowd because I get big crowds. I get ratings. They call me the ratings machine. So I have, she gets out and she starts asking me all sorts of ridiculous questions. And, you could see there was blood coming out of her eyes, blood coming out of her wherever.
Yeah, I think that alienated her, but she was already opposed to him because that's, she asked I think Megan takes her journalism seriously, and she just felt like asking the hardest questions was part of her responsibility. But, I think that old standard establishment conservative crowd isn't part of this, what's being split.
Well, this is the problem, right? Because every time someone like, let's say, Tucker Carlson or Marjorie Taylor Greene says something like, I want to defund the FBI. Or let's say Trump running on, I'm going to release the Epstein docs or whatever. A bunch of liberals will say it's in bad faith. They don't really mean it. They're just ginning up the base. And then when they come back into power, it becomes clear that some people were acting in bad faith, as evidenced by the Trump flip-flop on Epstein.
Sure. Your memo and release yesterday on Jeffrey Epstein, it left some lingering mysteries. One of the biggest ones is whether he ever worked for a American or foreign intelligence agency. The former labor secretary, who was Miami U.S. Attorney Alex Acosta, he allegedly said that he did work for an intelligence agency. So could you resolve whether or not he did? And also, could you say why there was a minute missing from the jailhouse tape on the night of the
Yeah, sure.
Could I just interrupt for 1 second? Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years. You're asking, we have Texas, we have this, we have all of the things. And are people still talking about this guy, this creep? That is unbelievable. Do you want to waste the time, and do you feel like answering?
I don't mind answering.
I can't believe you're asking a question on Epstein at a time like this, where we're having some of the greatest success and also tragedy with what happened in Texas. It just seems like a desecration, but you go ahead.
And then some people are pleasantly surprised, are ideologically consistent, and even seem to have been moved more to, I don't know if you want to call it the left, but more in an anti-war, America first, whatever you want to call it, direction, like Tucker Carlson or Candace Owens. And with Candace Owens, is it a bit of a chicken or the egg? Is it because she pushed a little bit and got so much backlash that it sort of, incited her to make this a hobby horse? That's certainly relatable to me. Like, I get that. The question I guess I'm asking is, how do you know beforehand whether or not the attack is in bad faith or not? Because as I'm sure you know, there's so many people. Like I was someone, for example, who when the defund the FBI stuff started to percolate, I said, great, that's a great idea. And even if you think Marjorie Taylor Greene is acting in bad faith, the solution is for the left to take up this mantle, to have the progressives put forward a bill to defund the FBI, and either they'll get buy-in from the right or they won't, and then they can prove that they didn't mean it in good faith. Right? And that's kind of what we're seeing, the conservative version of. Trump's in office now, and we're seeing, now that he has the power, he doesn't mean it anymore. But what frustrates me, and I'm sure has frustrated you over time, is that you're in this position where you are sort of defending the ideological project. You don't really know if any given person is going to hold the line or not. But you end up getting caught up in these circular arguments about whether or not Tucker Carlson is or isn't a good person, or Marjorie Taylor Greene is or isn't a good person, or whether you're trying to give cover to the right or not. And it seems to me to sort of, I don't know, it misses the point. It misses the point. And the way to prove it to me would be to just go ahead and pursue the...
But it misses the point by many universes, because and I think this is the important thing, is you can involve yourself in political debates or political questions or political activism in all sorts of ways. You can do it as a career. You can, meaning by which I mean you can be a pundit, and the easiest way to get a big audience and to grow and to get a big fan base is just to plant one party or the other, or one ideology or the other, and never alienate them, never deviate from that. So you can do it as kind of a career or other ways of being opportunistic about it. You can do it out of conviction. I think the Democratic Party is just inherently so much better than I'm just going to be a Democrat, or I'm going to be a liberal because I think liberalism is so much clearly better than conservatism. Or you can do it because you really want to see things change in the way that you think is necessary or is beneficial. And that becomes not a question of ideology or partisanship or just picking one side. It becomes kind of just a question of pragmatism. Like, how do you, or strategy, how do you wedge these opportunities? How do you exploit them? How do you form coalitions? How do you form alliances around specific issues so that you can build a majority? And I, spent a lot of years, when I started writing about politics in 2005, I watched for 3 years Democrats. I'll tell you just a quick story just to illustrate this point.
Wait, Glenn, before you do, did your mic just switch off?
Yeah, so let me just tell you this quick story, which is, so when I started writing about politics in 2005, I paid attention moderately to politics before that, but not really. It wasn't my job. It wasn't my work. I used to just read the paper and that was it. I think I was well informed because I read the New York Times and had a subscription to The Economist and The New Yorker. Anyway, and then once you start doing it full time, you realize just how much you were deceived, how little you actually knew. But I nonetheless spent the first 3 years vehemently attacking the war on terror and the civil liberties assaults that it ushered in. And my audience, consequently, was largely, overwhelmingly, even Democrats, just normie Democrats, liberal Democrats who were happy I was offering this very cogent and relentless critique against George Bush and Dick Cheney, and also some libertarians who had those same concerns about this erosion of civil liberties in the name of terrorism. And there were a lot of them, people who were against the Iraq War as well. And then, as you all know, I remember one time during the 2008 election when I actually did think it was important for Obama to win, and I really was convinced that he was going to uproot these constitutionally, dubious or blatantly unconstitutional policies that he had promised as a constitutional lawyer that he was offended by and would uproot. I went to some libertarian conference where I spoke, and some guy stood up in the audience and said, "Aren't you being kind of naive? Like, don't you understand that if the Democrats do win and they inherit all these powers, they're not going to dismantle them. They're going to keep them for themselves and even build on them because they're going to believe that in their hands, they're going to use them for benevolent ends." And I was like, I don't think that's viable given how flamboyantly Democrats have expressed this opposition to these policies. I don't think they're going to be able to turn around and just suddenly start justifying them simply because now it's in Obama's hands. And of course, to a large extent, that's exactly what happened. And so I think there's always this, I was actually having this debate with Crystal Ball earlier today on her show, where she was trying to claim that the cult of personality around Trump and the MAGA allegiance and the willingness to defend everything he does is far above any normal partisanship. And I was kind of saying I didn't think that was true. And if anything, I thought there was more willingness to hold Trump accountable, at least among prominent MAGA operatives and pundits, than is generally true. So I'm just saying that does exist for a long time. But at the same time, there were a good number of people, that's why I maintained a big audience, who were more on the left, or even, some people who weren't necessarily even on the left, who did want to hold Obama accountable. And so I always, if you go out and ask a conservative, they will tell you the same thing that liberals will say about MAGA people, which is none of them mean anything they say. They're completely insincere. They're just power hungry. And this is like a caricature of people. And Marjorie Taylor Greene is a perfect example. I'm glad you mentioned her, because she's kind of the consummate Trump supporter. Her entire political career, her political brand is based in being a supporter of MAGA and therefore a close vocal supporter of President Trump. And yet, if you listen to Marjorie Taylor Greene, not just about the bombing of Iran, which she vehemently denounced, even though Trump did it, and not just about the U.S. relationship with Israel, which she has also, with increasing courage and explicitness, is really hardcore now questioning. But even when it came to Trump's decision to reinstitute and escalate Biden's bombing campaign in Yemen, she was going around saying, no one in my district ever asked me about the Houthis. Like, why are we killing Houthis? How does that affect the lives of people in my district? That might help other countries like Israel. But what does that have to do with us? And I think if I had said in 2024 that Marjorie Taylor Greene, once Trump got into office, would end up, objecting if he pursued policies that he had said he opposed or that conflict with the America First agenda. As she said it, every liberal, every person on the left, every Democrat would mock me. And so you think Marjorie Taylor Greene has any genuine conviction? She's going to go along with anything. Yeah. And now here she is not doing that. And I think this assumption that we are encouraged to have about other people with other views, if they're all these caricatures of totally vacant, soulless people, that's beneficial for people who want to keep us divided, left versus right, Democrat versus Republican, liberal versus conservative. But it's not something that people who actually want to find ways to change this two-party stranglehold are actually going to believe in.
Yeah, I mean, it is difficult because I don't want to be blasé about the I think, not incorrect instinct to not want to blur, say, my own substantive politics with Marjorie Taylor Greene's or Tucker Carlson's. We don't believe the same thing. We do not believe the same thing. And if these things occasionally come up that we do agree on, like anti-interventionism being anti-war or hating the FBI or wanting the Epstein files released, then great. And I understand, especially because, as you know better than most, you can get tarred and feathered by sort of your own political cohort by being perceived as giving cover to political ideologies that are like kind of Trojan horsing their way into the mainstream through your consent. That you want to put ideological distance there. You want to you have to do this preamble every time you go to mention that you agree on the one narrow point. I understand the purpose of the preamble. I understand why people want the preamble, because it has been true that folks are allowed to, and liberals as well, be very slippery about changing their opinions over time and to worm their way back into positions of power and influence to then coerce the world to make more bad decisions going on and on. And you want to safeguard your kind of ideological project from that kind of malevolent influence. I get it. That being said, it does strike me that there was a real opportunity to wrest what should have been left issues all along about free speech and about the deep state and all of these things as left issues that they were so allergic. Exactly. They're so allergic to, because Marjorie Taylor Greene said it first, or Tucker Carlson said it first, but they won't touch it with, or Jimmy Dore said it first to do my obligatory force the vote mention in this episode. Right. That they won't touch the issue.
I would be very sad if I did a podcast with you and that didn't come up. So thank you for at least satisfying that itch.
The other one,
Briahna, I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Let's look at the other issue that the audience has mixed feelings about me bringing up is Zohran Mamdani, but it's related to this as well, where basically...
I know it's funny that you say that, because I was going to talk about Zohran Mandani just right this second.
Please, great.
Yes, it's true that anyone who identifies as a liberal or somebody on the left is going to have profound differences with Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tucker Carlson. Just immigration is one example. There are many others as well. But anyone who's on the left also is going to have at least equally profound differences with centrist Democratic Party establishment candidates, as evidenced by the way that Democrats are now trying to maneuver some kind of oppositional campaign to prevent Zohran Mamdani from becoming the mayor. And it's amazing every time they're presented, the left is with a Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden or whoever, they're told it's your obligation as a member of the party to vote for whatever candidate ends up getting the nomination. But of course, the reverse is not true. We saw that in the UK too. Those scumbag Blairites in the Labour Party always were saying, yes, we know you don't like us, but if you're on the left flank of the Labour Party, you have to vote for Tony Blair. You have to vote for, all these people who are our leaders. And then when Jeremy Corbyn became the leader, because the left finally exerted influence, they all turned around and purposely sabotaged him and decided they would rather lose with Jeremy Corbyn at the helm of the Labour Party. They'd rather have Boris Johnson and the Tories governing the country. And I know had Bernie won in 2016 the nomination, most Democrats would have engineered someone like Michael Bloomberg to run as a third party candidate, either to get behind him or to prevent Bernie from winning by fracturing the anti-Trump vote. And I wrote this article once, and this is one of my first breaches with the left. I think it was in 2008, and Ron Paul was running, and he was doing very, very well, way beyond what people anticipated. He had no money, no establishment support. He was this dissident outsider in the Republican Party. He was coming in second place in Iowa and second place in South Carolina with a very anti-war message, talking about the racist war on drugs. And I remember writing an article, and I was saying, okay, here's a candidate who is so much better than Obama and the Democrats on so many issues. He's a vehement opponent of the surveillance state while Obama is increasing it. He's a vehement opponent of the war on terror while Obama is bombing multiple Muslim countries. He wants to eliminate the drug war, which he denounced as racist, was something that Obama would never do. Obama was not in favor of ending the drug war. And these are major, major issues. And then Democrats will come along and say, how can you support someone like Ron Paul when he's pro-life or anti-immigrant or wants to build a wall or whatever? And then I was asking, why isn't that formula applied to Democratic Party leaders as well, who support all kinds of horrendous things that the left claims to find deeply offensive, things like Joe Biden financing Israel, but he's hardly the first Democratic president to do that, or all the wars that the Democrats pursue, or the corporatism that they pursue. Like, why is the differences with Ron Paul sufficient to say you can never work with him on any issue, no matter how important, no matter what the agreement is, or Marjorie Taylor Greene or Tucker Carlson, but it's still okay at the end of the day to encourage people to go vote for Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden, notwithstanding the massive differences that people have with them? And that's the kind of thing that frustrates me at the end of the day is, if you care about, undermining the CIA and weakening the surveillance state and the U.S. security state and the military industrial complex, you cannot confine yourself only to the people on the left who are sharing those views. You want to find other groups and factions that can form a coalition against it. And I just think it's very slothful, very self-indulgent to say, I'm not going to get my hands dirty with the Tucker Carlsons and the Marjorie Taylor Greenes or the Candace Owens to form an alliance against Israel. I think it's a genocide. I'd like it to stop, but I'm not going to actually dirty my hands to try and form a coalition to stop it. I'm far too good to have anything to do with those people. That I consider very suspect.
Yeah, I think that's why Palestine is the issue. Because I think historically what a liberal would have said is that, well, these sort of identity rights issues are existential in a way that is not true of, let's say, I'm not arguing this. I think this is the argument, though. Let's say anti-war in the abstract, talking about, let's say it's 2008. You can say, well, you can't throw, the LGBTQ community under the bus. You can't let the racists win. These are existential issues, quote unquote, black bodies. These kind of terms are levied around. And there's a lot of sort of emotional bullying about how those issues supersede anything else that might be at play. Because, Iraq's being bombed over there. Eventually people caught up and got upset about it, but it took some time. Whereas I think what's happening in Gaza is so visceral and so cataclysmic and so unjustified. Like, there's not, like, the pretexts are, we've been through this rigmarole so many times. It's incredibly flimsy. It's so disproportionate. It's so live streamed that any argument about even like real and substantive arguments about the rights of people at home and various, minority groups that are marginal, it seems petty to be talking about it in the wake of hundreds of thousands of people being killed. Or even the way that, and I saw you retweet the conversation between Saagar Enjeti and Tucker Carlson, where Saagar is like laying out how all of the safetyism and the excuses that the
identity politics, accusations of racism.
Exactly. That the right claim to hate, they're all now using in the framework of anti-Semitism. Exactly. Right. The pro-Israel right is using to defend Zionism and to defend the genocide, and how it really just was about wanting, understanding the power, the rhetorical power of those devices, but wanting it to be used for me as opposed to for you. And now the script is just going to keep getting flipped every which way. So, like, I understand. What am I saying? Gaza is a litmus test in a way that the Democratic Party is still failing to recognize. Precisely because I think there is nothing worse than there's nothing more visceral, there's nothing more in your face than a genocide. And all of those rhetorical tricks just aren't working for anybody anymore. That being said, it hasn't kept the Democratic Party from trying to, Israel Zohran Mamdani out of his seat. And I do wonder what you think of Zohran, on the whole, given everything that you just said about the guy who stood up in 2008 and said Obama's going to betray us too. That once Democrats are in power, they're going to keep the Bush era overreaches in place. Like, knowing that to be true, knowing that, yeah, they were going to run Bloomberg against Bernie if he managed to win a primary. Like, knowing all of that's true, what do you make of Zohran Mamdani? And do you think that this could be different because perhaps the circumstances have changed and the reality of Israel and the genocide has radicalized people in so many ways? Is this time going to be different?
It's funny because I do feel a little bit like Lucy and Charlie Brown in the football, because I never really lose my hope that things will be better and different, even though I've been so disappointed so many times when I've allowed myself to have that hope. And I think even though so often that gets disappointed and betrayed, then that hope ends up having proven baseless. I think it's so important never to become nihilistic or defeatist or black-pilled, like, oh, everything's just terrible and there's no way to change it. I mean, I pretty much believe that anybody who does what you do or what I do, or who listens to what you do or what I do, or participates in any way, inherently has that hope. If they didn't, they wouldn't keep, masochistically subjecting themselves. Yeah. And I look at Zoran in two different ways. I mean, there's a part of me that sees a striver, that sees somebody extremely ambitious, and, he's 33 and he's highly likely to become the mayor of America's biggest city. You don't fall into that by accident. That's something where you get to if you have to be very ambitious and very calculating. That is not easy to do. You don't get there because, just someone, it's like winning the lottery. And so I look at him as somebody who I would not be shocked to see making concessions of a fundamental or even radical kind in order to get things done or to prop up his popularity or even his future political aspirations. That wouldn't shock me. But I also see somebody who's been pretty consistent in his advocacy over the years, which gives me more optimism that that's something that's a deeply held conviction. And one of the things that has really impressed me the most about him is he has refused to repudiate things he says and believes just in order to kind of placate a crowd that's going to hate him anyway, which I think was a huge mistake that Jeremy Corbyn used to make. He would say, yes, there is an anti-Semitism problem within the Labour Party and within my group of followers, even though it was a completely cynical, bullshit, accusatory campaign to try and destroy him. And he gave credence to it by thinking he could placate these people who wanted to destroy him. And I think, obviously, Kamala Harris, one of the reasons among many that she was such a horrible candidate is because she so obviously didn't believe in anything they would show her the things she said when running for the Democratic nomination in 2019. She said, I don't believe in any of those anymore.
It was a debate.
It was, exactly. Like accusing Joe Biden of being a racist. She's like, oh, that was just a debate. Or, all those positions that she took. And then felt like she had to moderate. That, to me, is the worst thing. And one of the things that was so impressive about Zoran is when he was asked about globalize the intifada, it would be so easy for him to have said, this is a really terrible phrase to use. I understand it might be well-intentioned, but whatever. He could have all spoken out and denounced it very easily. And instead, he refused to and explained that what intifada actually means, that it's not inherently violent, it's certainly not inherently terroristic. He refused to repudiate a phrase that he doesn't feel deserves renouncing. And that, to me, is a kind of courage and belief in his own convictions that does give me hope. I'm not saying a year from now when he's mayor, if he, I don't know, lets Netanyahu come to the city and doesn't actually have him arrested, despite promising to do so during the campaign, and we'll be like, oh my God, I can't believe it. I can't believe he's somebody who was saying things he really wasn't going to do. There's going to be concessions made. But, if you watch somebody stand up with those beliefs and energize huge numbers of young people who are otherwise extremely disillusioned with the Democratic Party, bring out all new voters and run a left-wing campaign that, for me, is the best of left-wing populism. It's kind of like the best of Bernie in 2016, focused on economic issues, on affordability, on economic inequality, talking about the menace of billionaires, and really saying, locked focus on those issues and not allowing the media or other people to distract you into other left-wing issues that people don't actually care about and probably you're not going to do anything about anyway. That, to me, shows a very impressive kind of discipline as well. So yeah, I do find his candidacy exciting. And I'm go ahead and record that in a year from now, show this to me, and I'll be like, yeah, I guess I got fooled again. But for now, at least, I'm optimistic.
It feels like he's very, his talent is giving, feeding the base enough that we almost look the other way when there have been a couple of these instances where he has not repudiated past beliefs, but sort of recalibrated a little bit. So yes, he defends globalize the Intifada. He also says it's not a phrase that I've used, and I understand that it hurts people, and there is a rising anti-Semitism problem, and I'm willing to devote however many dollars of resources to helping to fight it in New York City, right? And so the left hears the I'm standing by globalize the Intifada bit and sort of ignores the I'm going to throw money at the kind of anti-Semitism programs that have been used to do like surveillance and hurt protesters over, historically. Or, I have this begrudging respect, but also worry about the way he's been able to parry the defund the police stuff, where he clearly supports defund, has tweeted it a million times. But when asked about it, says, no, what I want to do is make it so cops can do their job and not have to do, public, health services jobs and all these other kinds of things, and to use resources in a way that makes everybody safer and makes it safer for cops too, which is literally what defund is, right? So I have mixed feelings about it, right? On one hand, it's like, well done, sir. You're going to get into Gracie Mansion if you keep this up. And the other part of me is like, well, if Democrats had simply done the job of explaining defund this entire time for the last 5 years, including at the point in 2020 when polls were actually with you because everyone was so appalled by watching the, on-camera death of George Floyd, then the slogan defund wouldn't have the rhetorical power that it does now to beat up on the left, and Zoran wouldn't have to be doing this little jig that he's doing now. I have mixed feelings. And there's a part of me, there's a bigger thing that I've been wrestling with, which is if the theory of the case that the left has been presenting is the one that you just described, where ultimately, if you're allowed to take power, it's because you've demonstrated a willingness to make compromises. And if you aren't willing to make those compromises, you're fundamentally obstructed from getting into power. If that's the theory that we've been sort of advancing, what does it mean, actually, if Zoran manages to get into power and doesn't fold?
No, I totally get that point. I absolutely agree with you. It's been the major critique of the Democratic Party, obviously, that they basically stand for nothing because they're afraid that if they actually stand for anything, they'll either alienate their donor base or their voting base or their coalitions on which they depend. And so they're just like this very frightened, scared party. Like Kamala Harris is for me, the standard bearer of the Democratic Party, like someone who believes in nothing, might be like a minimally competent technocrat or whatever, will surround herself people with Harvard and Yale degrees. And, who knows, maybe there's like some minimal governance benefit to that, although I don't even think so, but just being generous. But beyond that, there's nothing else there. And I think people sense that. And in the case of, I think there's a big difference between making minimal rhetorical compromises to wield power for a set of convictions and beliefs that you intend to adhere to, no matter how unpopular they might be or how much political cost they might extract, versus compromising your entire worldview just to acquire power, in which case then I agree with you. What's the point of acquiring power if you don't have any actual convictions you're willing to defend, regardless of then it's just not leadership. And I guess what I'm saying at the end of the day is, even the term socialist is one he's not running away from, even though he easily could. I haven't even really heard him resort to the Bernie thing about I just want to make it like Denmark and Norway. He's almost defending a more robust form of socialism. I don't think Bernie would say we should implement policies to banish the idea of a billionaire, the way Zoran has said that in the last several weeks. And I think part of this is probably age. I don't know. Maybe he's not. Go ahead.
Don't make me defend Bernie. I guess I do feel like we did the every billionaire is a policy failure thing. I feel like that if Bernie didn't literally say it, I feel like Bernie World definitely said it.
No, right.
He invaded against millionaires and billionaires.
Okay, that's fair. I'm not sure I've ever heard Bernie say we should have no billionaires, the way I heard Zoran say we should be billionaire free. There should not be such a thing as a billionaire. But but again, I do also think that a lot of this is generational. Like Bernie, when he ran in 2016, was already in his 70s. he'd been a senator for decades and a member of the House for decades and he was a Brooklyn Jew who went to Vermont and worked his way up in Vermont politics, like a very improbable combination. And of course, along the way, he learned how to compromise in a way that maybe Zoran hasn't, like somebody who comes from more activist circles and like Queens hasn't really done that yet. I don't know. I think what was like, just look at the stuff with the Epstein thing, just to use it because it's such a vibrant, fresh example.
Please.
You have all these people who I'm not supporters and Trump pundits raising the issue of Epstein and now have to confront the fact that the government is saying it's nothing there. These were the same exact people who were saying for years that the Biden administration is covering up the client list because there are people on there too powerful like Bill Gates and Bill Clinton, and they want to keep, this pedophile ring a secret. They were saying that Bill Gates was in Congress lobbying to make sure the client list never got revealed. They were saying that there's all kinds of tapes in the possession of the government of very powerful people who were having sex with underage girls. And those same exact people get put into the highest positions in the government where they're most empowered to do everything about that they promised and swore they would do. Attorney General, Director of the FBI, Deputy Director of the FBI, Vice President. And within less than 6 months in power, they're suddenly saying exactly what Biden administration officials have been saying as well. There's no client list. There's no evidence of blackmail. This is all nothing. Trump today was asked about it. He's like, why would any of you still be talking about something as trivial as Jeffrey Epstein when the whole Trump movement made that like the Rosetta Stone to their worldview? Why does that happen? Why? Yeah. Why would that happen? And I do think there's something about this permanent political system that we have that once you enter it and once you agree to kind of occupy those offices and wield the power that it gives you and the perks that it furnishes and provides you, there's something about how fortified it is, how well constructed it is, that it basically drains and compromises everybody. I mean, at least that's what I've seen.
Yeah, so then what does that mean to be rooting for? This is the problem with the rooting for the Zoran of it all. Like, yeah. I don't think, not to damn them with false praise, but I don't think that the Trump, the kind of like the Trump-affiliated Epstein truthers were uniquely corruptible. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think they're like uniquely vulnerable or like, zealotous or like, uniquely idolized Trump. Or any of the, like that. This is what political parties are. And there's people like this on both sides of the aisle. So for them to have flipped, to be literally, to your point, be put in the positions of FBI director and all of these things, and to now be saying the same thing that Biden folks did. Yeah, like there's something either incredibly coercive going on, they've got compromise on everybody, or there's actually nothing there, which I don't personally believe, but like, let's say that's a potential outcome. So what does that mean? If it's the former, if power is such that no amount of folks having a sincere and deeply held desire to get to the bottom of something or to right the world or to bring around real socialism or whatever. By the way, Bernie did say billionaires shouldn't exist. I Googled it. There should be no billionaires, quote,
Point
Bernie
for Bernie.
Sanders.
Point for Bernie and for you. I can see that point then.
Sorry, I don't know why. I'm not on the payroll. I don't know why I'm still defending Bernie. But like, if all of that's true, then like, what is the point of, like, this is what I'm wrestling with. It's not like there's one level of the conversation that's like, is Zoran's like, is he corruptible? Is there something like a character flaw? Like, trying to read the tea leaves of who he is as a person. But I'm less interested in that. I think as far as human beings go, everything that I've seen is that he is as good as it gets. Let's just like allow that. But systemically, if the complaint we've been making about this system is what it is, and we're seeing it play out on the Epstein thing, where no matter what, no matter how much of a true believer you are, if you get in the door and you open the vault, you never actually tell us if aliens exist. You never actually tell us if Epstein, the little black book exists. You're never actually willing to tell us who shot RFK or JFK, any of them. Right. Everybody that the government shot. You're never willing to do it. Then like, that's the reason maybe we shouldn't get excited about Zoran. Or that's the reason at very least we should be using this opportunity to expose the failures of the system, even as we root for Zoran, because it's through him that we expose the failures of the system.
I'm totally, I'm totally with you. I think this is how I would describe it and I could be totally wrong about this. This could just be ongoing naivete, but I do believe that the Senator Obama that ran for president in 2007 and 8 viewed the Iraq War, the war on terror, and all the civil liberties abridgments that it ushered in as genuinely wrong. And he wanted to oppose it and uproot it. And I remember one in particular, and we have to remember that Obama was only in Washington for like 3 seconds when he ran for president. He got there in 2004, and by 2006 he was deciding to run for president, which I think also contributed to the fact that he still had it, kind of like what we were talking about, Zoran, kind of freshness. He hadn't been totally jaded and corrupted and commandeered. And I remember him giving a speech about how the people in Guantanamo who are there forever should at least have one opportunity to get into court with habeas corpus. This was something that the Democrats had promised that they were going to provide and then voted against and made sure it didn't fail. But he gave this speech on the Senate floor and he was saying, like, imagine as a mother, your son is taken to prison and all you want is to prove his innocence, but you don't even have one chance to get into court. You're just told he's going to stay in prison for life and and it came from, I don't think he could have said all that and the way he said it without having really felt it. Like, as a constitutional lawyer, it's instinctively offensive to you. And I believe that about other things. And then he gets into the White House and there's a whole system waiting for him. He has generals who come, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the CIA, they come with big medals on their chest with all kinds of presentations. And they say, here's the secret classified information that will convince you that all these programs that I know as a candidate you didn't understand and didn't want to continue are actually absolutely necessary, because if we don't continue them, there's going to be terror attacks and that's going to be blood on your hands. I interviewed Mike Johnson by chance, like 2 months before he became House Speaker. And the reason I had him on was because he was such a vehement opponent of renewing FISA, the spying law, without reforms. That was one of the reasons I had him on. And he was arguing so vehemently, we cannot renew FISA without all these guardrails and safeguards. And then he gets to be House Speaker, and I'm not even kidding, Bree, that week that he became House Speaker, he came out and not only did he usher the bill to renew FISA with no reforms to the floor, he became an outspoken advocate of it. And when people asked him, yeah, he was like, oh, well, I got taken to a secret briefing and I was shown in the NSA or the CIA and the bowels there and some, they make it some super fancy room that's designed to be impressive with all kinds of, maps and graphics and secret codes and whatever. And he says he got a briefing and it showed him that actually FISA with no safeguards is urgent to our national security. And I do think there's a permanent system in Washington that knows how to manipulate newly arrived presidents, newly arrived young mayors, in New York as well. I'll just give you one quick story that actually has informed my thinking about this. As you know, like my husband was a politician. He was an elected member of Congress, before that as a city councilman in Rio de Janeiro. And David never wanted to go into politics as a career. He hated politics. He wanted to avoid it. He fatally did because he kind of got dragged in, but he really believed that it was like a way to improve the lives of the people he grew up with, of the communities that he came from, these very poor, deprived communities. That's all he cared about. And at some point, he got there with all these kind of like idealistic views about, avoiding corruption and corrupt deals and not voting for things that he didn't want to vote for. But then he started to realize, he was told, oh, you want this bill that's going to provide services to this community, or change this, reform this thing that you think is going on. Okay, we'll bring that to committee and we'll allow it to get through committee as long as you give your support to this really shitty, corrupt deal that is important to me, because and then you're faced with the question, do I start compromising as a way to make sure that I can deliver things to the people who sent me here that I really care about? Or do I stand on principle and get nothing done for the people who sent me here and whose life and this is embedded in these systems. And then the problem is, you make a compromise here, you make a compromise there, you embrace that rationale, and before you know it, you're Kamala Harris, and you're telling yourself, oh, one more compromise because that'll get me to this higher position and then I'll really be able to do things. But by that point, you have so eroded your integrity and character, even if you began with the best of intentions and filled with integrity, that this is what these systems are designed to do. And they do co-opt people.
So I don't disagree that is exactly what happens. I mean, of course that's what happens. But, if we're if we're offering, at least I'll speak for myself, if I'm offering sort of, for whatever reason, I've been put in this position and I'm offering prescriptive advice for the left, it feels, that is why I think people in my sort of section of the left are so sort of pessimistic about electoral politics as an avenue for change. When someone like AOC is seemingly sort of aware of this dynamic and goes into Congress saying, I would rather be a one-term congressperson than to compromise my values in this way. And then cut to 2 years later and she's talking about, well, I was able to hand out these backpacks in my district to low-income kids filled with much-needed goods, or I provide burial, I mean, this is one of the arguments around force, but I got these burial benefits for people whose loved ones had passed from COVID and couldn't afford to bury their loved ones. I mean, yeah, I get how that would be so visceral for you and your district, engaging with these real people who are going through these really hard times in the middle of a pandemic and all of these things. And you feel like you're able to provide direct services. And yeah, the abstract or very long-term political goals, as important as they are, like Medicare for all, can take a back seat. I understand the psychology of it and the real world politics of it. But there's a part of me that thinks your job going in there, elected by the DSA, is to expose the extent to which you're being asked to make these compromises. It is not a natural phenomenon. It is not a necessary phenomenon. It is not necessarily the way the world works that it has to be this either or game. This horse trading has to exist. And part of the way that the folks who are imposing these compromises on me are able to get away with it is because nobody calls out members of their own party that are conditioning good things on bad things happening.
Totally.
And it shouldn't be her job to call out when Nancy Pelosi makes her cry on the House floor and coerces her into changing her Iron Dome vote. There's a world where instead of crying and taking it on the chin and incurring the wrath of the left, she goes to the nearest microphone and says exactly whatever Nancy Pelosi just threatened her with and says, you have to this is the leader of your party and she's putting Israel first or she threatened me in whatever way she threatened me, and then create the public consciousness to make a political cost for those horse trades. Yeah, go ahead.
Again, you know I'm on your side with this, but and I am the last person to defend AOC, and I'm not defending her, but what I will say is I got swept up in AOC fever. It was Ryan Graham who actually, nobody knew AOC. Nobody paid attention to that race until the very end. Like only a few, like the Young Turks did, and a few like left kind of YouTube shows did. But Ryan Graham was the first one who directed me to her and said, I think you really like her. I think you're going to be interested in her. At the time in 2018, that was when there was that peaceful resistance in Gaza, a march on the wall, and they were sniping, as the IDF was, innocent civilians against people who were marching peacefully to the wall as a symbol of resistance and their own imprisonment. And she came out and, basically repeatedly slammed the Democrats for supporting this and for, which is like crack to me and just like, oh my God, I can't believe it. And then I interviewed her, I didn't want to just take these tweets. I wanted to kick the tires really hard. And I interviewed her for like an hour, and you go watch that interview. I mean, you will be enamored of it. And afterward I was like, go watch, go cheer for AOC, go donate money to her. This is like a really impressive candidate. And then in that first term, she did the kind of thing that you were talking about. I remember very early on, she had that protest that occupied Nancy Pelosi's office.
I remember. I was there.
Okay, yeah.
I was there. I was covering it for The Intercept.
Right. And I think what ended up happening was, I don't know that it was explicit threats, but it became very obvious to her that if she continued that kind of outsider-ish attacks on her own party, they were going to keep her off any committees. She wouldn't be able to get anything done. Exactly the kind of...
Which happened anyway. Well, they kicked her off the committees anyway. They put Jerry Connolly and he died in the seat.
And they wouldn't put her there. They wouldn't put her there. There was that congresswoman from upstate New York who was this moderate, who represented this like purple moderate district, who was constantly attacking Nancy Pelosi as a leftist, as a way to keep her seat. And one time AOC ran against her. I think her name was Congresswoman Rice. It was just some upstate New York who had actually attacked Pelosi viciously in a way that Pelosi's okay with. Like, I want these centrist Democrats to bash me if it means they keep their seat. But because AOC had criticized Democrats and talked about primaries, they put her on I think it was like the House Energy and Commerce Committee where AOC wanted to be. And AOC got destroyed in that vote. It was like 38-4 or something. And that was, by then she was already a good team player. And now, of course, AOC is the ultimate good team player. And is she really influencing the Democratic Party in her image, or have they just commandeered and co-opted her and the people who follow her? I think clearly it's the latter. And so but here's the thing. I still believe, and by the way, when Zoran gets in, if he gets elected, he's not going to be a dictator. He's going to have to deal with all kinds of people on the city council who are funded by the Israel lobby. He's going to have to deal with people on the city council who are funded by Wall Street. He's going to have to deal with real estate developers and bankers and people who form the tax base. He's going to have to horse trade if he wants to get things done. And, down that road very quickly lies the... Well, I'm saying he's going to think he does. He's going to think he does.
But Shama Sawan's argument is that that's the wrong approach. And that, especially when you have public opinion on your side, you have, it's just the right thing to do. In her case, it was the $15 minimum wage. That she's in a blue city with these Democrats on the city council who are opposing her, and that she has to organize and make sure that there's a political cost for them in opposing her in order to actually get things done. And if you have the attitude that you're going to be able to kind of negotiate with the real estate industry in New York City to find some compromise positions you've already lost, that your job is to show them that you can force them. You can force them because you have, organized. And
an army of people behind you. An army of people behind you.
Which Zoran has, but also Bernie had, and then he dismantled. So the question is...
But you know who had that more than anyone, Brie? And this is why I think Obama is ultimately such a disgraceful figure. Obama had that more than anybody.
Yeah.
I haven't seen a politician with a populist level of support like Obama had. That whole, those articles about the brilliance of the Obama digital strategy, they had email lists in the millions, they had people they could mobilize. And that was what Obama promised to do, was to take these millions of Americans who wanted change, who were thirsty for, changing the way Washington works and for whom it works, and go there and combat the forces that were there. And instead, as soon as he got into power, he immediately ignored them. They never galvanized any of them once for any reason. And instead, he just started figuring out how he could ingratiate himself with the powerful factions in Washington that had been ruled for decades. And he became nothing more than an instrument and a tool and a puppet and a symbol for all of them. And that, to me, was his... So I think you're absolutely right that you need somebody with the kind of personality that is willing to go to war with the most powerful people, knowing how you're going to get attacked, knowing what they're going to try and do to you. You need somebody who has the capacity and the charisma to mobilize people behind you, because at the end of the day, having a huge army of millions of people is the only way to compete with, Wall Street and real estate developers and the Israel lobby. And you need somebody who's willing to roll the dice on their own political future and not play it safe. To obviously, if he gets elected mayor at 33 years old, he's going to be fantasizing about being president one day. And those kinds of human dynamics, those psychological dynamics where you're like, I kind of smell this power now. I think that's why Bernie 2016 was so different than Bernie 2020, because Bernie 2016 never believed he could win at the start, whereas Bernie 2020 really thought he had a chance. And there was a difference as a result in how he was doing things. I think all those factors, you really need the right person. And it's a rare person willing to resist those temptations. But it doesn't mean they don't exist. It doesn't mean they don't exist and you just assume. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I don't think you should be blackpilled and be like, no one's going to be able to do this.
Well,
because history shows that the right people can do things like that.
Does it?
Well, we've had revolutions against the most entrenched, dangerous, powerful governments because people
revolutions, but not electoral revolutions, right?
Well, right. Okay, yes, that's fair enough. But at the same time, FDR was a pretty transformative president. Now he was, he had 4 terms, but he did battle to get the New Deal, Wall Street,
and he had the communists at his back. Right?
Well, exactly.
Isn't that the story that he's the compromise position?
And there were, he wasn't revolutionary in the sense that he didn't make compromises, but it still ended up, the New Deal is a transformative set of policies that affected the United States and what it was and how people's lives were shaped for decades.
Absolutely. But the argument as it's been explained to me by untold numbers of historians on this podcast and elsewhere is that it's the make me do it argument. It's the I only was as left as I was because we were coming out of this labor movement with militant, violent labor resistance happening, and you were trying to put down a much more radical movement, or to assuage a much more radical movement by offering, and also coming out of economic decline, all these kind of things that enabled you to have the mandate to do what you did. And I wonder if the circumstances, if that context exists today, because what we have today is, on one hand, a small but growing and important number of DSA folks in New York who were able to pull off what felt impossible. God bless them. Truly all the kudos in the world for that organization effort.
Totally.
And you have a Democratic Party that has, instead of spending the last week talking about the big bad bill and people getting kicked off of their health care and all of the things that should be the priorities of the Democratic Party, have been talking about how Zohran Mamdani is an Islamist. And you've got Kirsten Gillibrand going off the deep end doing racist tirades. And Hakeem Jeffries doing photo shoots in head-to-toe Adidas for some reason.
I guess someone told him that would make him more relatable or whatever. I mean, that's the worst. When Chuck Schumer goes on cable and he's like, those bastards, oh, sorry. And he pretends that that's just how spontaneously slipped out because they're telling him Trump curses, so do. It's nothing more cringe than when Democrats try and become relatable to the people. And it's also...
yeah, it's hello, fellow kids.
but yeah, exactly. But this is a good example. I have my problems with DSA, et cetera. But what DSA did, and it's sort of the criticism of what the Green Party doesn't do, which to some extent is fair, but not as fair as people think it is. But what DSA did was they built an entire infrastructure. They recruited these candidates. I mean, Zoran didn't come out of nowhere. He was a member of the state assembly. He got to be a member of the state assembly, not because that was the party preference, but because he had, the same kind of force behind him that AOC had to beat Joe Crowley in kind of low turnout elections. And they, have a growing membership base. They're super active. And it was a very populist movement that brought Zoran. Yeah, I mean, obviously you can't win with just the DSA vote. He won citywide. He attracted a lot of,
but with 50,000 volunteers,
right? Exactly.
Because of the DSA, where you can really knock every door. Credit.
No, absolutely. All credit.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, you need to expand the base, and they did, and that makes actually what they did even more impressive.
Yeah.
So that, but I guess what I'm saying is, and this is what I started off saying, is Zoran, I don't want to psychoanalyze him. I was hoping he won. I was very happy when he destroyed Andrew Cuomo. I hope he becomes mayor. It's by far the best possible outcome for New York and even for broader Democratic Party politics. To kind of force that kind of energy and movement into Democratic Party politics. I'm rooting for that. I'm hoping for that. I just, having fallen for Obama, having fallen for AOC, to some extent having fallen for Bernie, I guess I'm just very guarded now. And there is something about Zoran that seems a bit striverish to me, a bit careerist to me. But I don't, who knows? Maybe I'm totally wrong. And maybe, as you said, the people who brought him to where he is will kind of force him or galvanize him to do the kind of fighting that I do think can work. But I'm just not, like I said, if a year from now you come to me and he's basically like Pelosi, and doing deals with the developers and Wall Street, and making gestures toward, Israel through Jewish synagogues and whatever, and inviting Netanyahu and giving some speech about how we can't arrest people and we have to have dialogue, I'm not going to be shocked, is what I'm saying as well.
I don't actually think he's going to do that. I was listening.
Hold on one second, I just got to get my recharger. You go ahead.
Sure. I saw a clip on Instagram this morning of Zoran talking what's the name of the movie? It's not Islamism. What is it? There's that Israelism, that movie that they got banned in all the places. I didn't realize he was in it. And I was thinking about how deep his commitment to Palestine goes and how he founded. I watched the DSA clip of him speaking at a church in the West Village where he's talking about how he started the pro-Palestine chapter in college and all of this stuff. And I don't think he's going to waver on his commitments to Gaza. I just don't think it could be around the edges. I could see him softening up the defund stuff and all that. But like on Palestine, I don't see him wavering.
No, I agree with you. But also remember, like, the pre-U.S. Senate Obama was pretty radical. I mean, he was there
having dinner with Edward Said and stuff. Yeah, I remember. But that being said, I think okay, first I want to say I'm glad that Obama won. I'm glad that AOC won. I'm glad that Bernie ran. All because we would not be able to make the arguments about the limitations of electoral politics if we didn't have those test cases. We all had to learn this together. And so I'm glad it played out the way it did. It had to. Otherwise, we'd just be sitting here sounding like negative Nancy's, like with no basis for these claims. Okay. Mm-hmm. But the part that frightens me is that it's like a lose-lose either way. If Zoran is committed to keeping his organizing base alive, to staying committed to Palestine, to committing to arresting Netanyahu when he comes to New York, then they're not going to let him be mayor. They're not going to let him be mayor. And I just had India Walton on, and I know that there are a lot of differences between the two of them and that he has so much more support than she does. And she admitted, like, she recognized that it was a mistake to sort of try to triangulate after she's won the primary and they started attacking her on the socialism stuff. Like, and Zoran's not doing that. He's like really trumping this bad boy and never apologizing for anything. And I think that's the right thing to do. And he has like more legs on his campaign than she did. But I am concerned that the more I believe in him as a person and his integrity, the more we're going to see untold efforts, unprecedented efforts to obstruct him.
Oh, I mean, or worse, destroy him in some way. I just look at what happened with Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush.
Yeah.
Their opposition to the Israel was not particularly radical. They were questioning the U.S. relationship. Cori Bush would say, my, district is falling apart. People here have no health care, no access to good education. Why are we sending billions of dollars to Israel? That kind of argument. And also, saying what a lot of people were saying about what was going on in Gaza. And AIPAC just came and poured $15 million into each of their districts, got, very cynical, black, politician in St. Louis said they couldn't be accused of racism. Now AIPAC owns him, Wesley Bell, and they moved her from Congress, and they did the same with Jamal Bowman. And, there are kind of backstops to populist uprisings within a democracy, especially one that's as rich and powerful and well-constructed and well-fortified as the United States. So had Obama not done what he did, which is go and ingratiate himself to all those power centers and, empowered special forces and the CIA and Wall Street and, put Timothy Geithner as Treasury Secretary to take care of Wall Street first. Had he not done that, had he been the version of Obama that he was promising to be, that we would have wanted him to be, et cetera, the question would then be, where would Obama be now? I don't believe he would have won a second term. There's all these different ways, and that's why I do believe in the term deep state. It's like a permanent power faction in American politics that is there to backstop the public from electing somebody who's going to subvert or reject or work against the dogmas and orthodoxies they value most. And that does strengthen your argument that electoral politics is at least very limited, at least in the United States, in terms of what it can accomplish. Because even if you do elect the best possible person, the kind of ideal of what I described earlier, somebody totally willing to sacrifice their political future, somebody very willing to take on and fight, kind of a very combative person, somebody so steeped in their principles and convictions, there are all kinds of ways to destroy them or just to strip them of any real power. There's big money that can be wielded. There's all kinds of other things that can be done. And yeah, those are things that will happen if he really does end up being this radical agent of change that a lot of people are hoping he'll be. And by the way, and when you get there and you see that, right, when that's communicated to you, when you observe that, what's being marshaled against you, and he's already seeing some of it. I mean, look at what they've done to him. But it'll be so much worse once he's actually mayor and he starts really committing himself to the most sacred policies, to destroying those or undermining those or uprooting them. You see what can be done to you. You can see what's threatened against you. You can see the kinds of power that gets amassed against you. And it almost takes a sociopath just completely disregard that and say, I don't care. I'm not frightened by that in any way. You know, like a Julian Assange has that kind of personality type, but he has a very rare personality type that enabled him to kind of throw caution to the wind that way. And, you know, I think
really live the risk, live with the consequences.
Well, yeah, he was, you know, imprisoned for a decade, mentally destroyed, physically eroded. And how many people are willing to endure that for a cause?
And this is what my mom says. And to her,
let's get her on the next time. I'll make her comfortable. She'll loosen up
her up.
The camera. Yeah.
I mean, like, you know, that everyone who was really great, everyone, all of our movement leaders who were the real deal, were killed or died in poverty, like chased out of America, ruined, or killed. And, you know, Marianne does this too. She talks about how, like, yeah, when I was growing up, you know, she feels like the kind of the problem with her generation, or what like de-radicalized everybody, was living through that like spate of assassinations and being like, gosh, oh, well, okay, I guess we're going to do the 80s and get ourselves a Benz and go work at Xerox or whatever, because otherwise they're going to shoot me.
Yeah, and you don't think that's in every leader's mind? You know, like they blew, like in public.
Yes.
They blew his head off. And then, you know, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, RFK Jr., George Wallace, you know, anybody who just kind of is an outsider threat. But especially ones who threaten the core kind of capitalist dogma, militarist dogma. And that is in everybody's mind. And if it's not in their mind, it's going to be put in their mind. And I don't mean to sound conspiratorial about it. It's not really conspiratorial. It's kind of done out pretty much out in the open.
Well, it'd be more out in the open if Trump would just release those files.
Well, I mean, Trump is a good example too, because I do believe Trump is a divided person. Like, I don't believe Trump is this totally cynical person who really believed in the dogma of Ronald Reagan and George Bush and Dick Cheney the whole time. I think he has conflicting views, and he's so easily manipulated that it is kind of a question of who manipulates him best. But I also, you know, when there was all these stories about this big rift between him and Netanyahu and the U.S. pursuing an agenda separate from Israeli interests, you know, part of me knew that that was never going to happen, because even if Trump were really committed to that, even if Trump was like, no, I'm America first, I don't care, I'm not letting Israel impede our interest, the amount of threat and attack and destruction that would be brought upon Trump's head, he got very close to spending the rest of his life in prison already. And so he is afraid of those things. He is worried about those things. He thinks about those things. Those are at the forefront of his mind. And he's not a particularly principled person. He's not someone who self-sacrifices for a political cause. And his path is much easier going along with these dogmas rather than uprooting them as he promised to do. And I think he might be more susceptible to that just because he's so bereft of real views or real values or real convictions other than himself. But I think most human beings are affected in some way, even subconsciously, by those sorts of things.
I asked you about sort of the rift on the right among sort of the more stridently anti-war, consistently anti-war camp, and the folks who've sort of capitulated on Israel and some of these other issues. I wonder what you make of the maybe it's uncharitable to describe it as a hit piece, but the kind of Zoran critical piece that Taibbi wrote on his Substack a week or so ago, like right after he won. Did you get a chance to look at that?
I did. I didn't read it in full, but I saw people discussing it. I read some of it. I understand what it says. You know, I think Matt is a very particular case, kind of very specific case, because a lot of the excesses of the left were directed at him in a way that tried to destroy him, his reputation, his career. in a way that he feels was extremely unjust. And I have to say, I kind of think it was unjust as well. I mean, he was Me Too'd in a very aggressive way, even though there was never a single victim, a single woman who was stepping up and saying he acted inappropriately with me. You know, there was like an example of some journalist saying when he was younger, they had a conflict and he threw like water on her, but there was no woman saying he made advances on me. And also, you know, I know he went through the same kind of rift with the left over Russiagate and over some of this kind of hysteria around Trump that I did, the censorship by the left as well. And one of the things you have to guard against, I think, is, and I've learned this over the years by being attacked at one point or another by pretty much everybody, that if you're being attacked in a way that you think is unfair, and usually you think the way you're being attacked is unfair, you have to really guard against this reactionary approach. We're going to say, okay, the left is attacking me unjustly, so now I'm going to make myself an enemy of the left, and build your whole kind of worldview on that. But it's very hard, especially if there's something quite personal about what they're doing. And I think that did sour Matt on kind of the left, like the real left, in a way that maybe had he not endured that personally, wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think it's an enormous credit to you that even though you've been obviously targeted, that you've been so ideologically consistent and such an important North Star for so many people. And I think have won the respect of almost everybody. I mean, like, one of the most unified days on Twitter was the day that everybody came around to defending you and talking about how much we all love Glenn Greenwald and how important you are to all of us as a journalist. And I think that your, like, the phenomenon you described of having a kind of reactionary impulse is real. But what doesn't quite gel for me is that stuff happened kind of in the before times, like quite a few years ago. And since then, you know, Matt favorably covered and was sympathetic to the Bernie movement, for instance, and, you know, has done a lot of good reporting, including a book on Palestine and all of this other stuff since then. And so it doesn't necessarily account to me, the Me Too stuff doesn't necessarily account for me, to me for the more recent shift. And I'm someone, for example, who, you know, was very supportive of the Twitter files, you know, wanted there to be even more broad coverage.
You had some criticisms of it, but
yeah, I did. I wanted it to include an investigation into bias against the left, but I had no issue with the paths that were investigated as well, right? And I think that Lee Fong, for instance, did really good reporting out of the Twitter files. There was good reporting that came out of it. But that didn't seem to be what I felt like were pretty narrow questions resulted in a rift there. I certainly am not someone who's ever even mentioned Matt's Me Too business, right? And I certainly am not a Russia file person, and also defended him about that kind of reporting as well, and was critical of the censorship among liberals for the Hunter Biden tapes and all of those kinds of things. So it doesn't necessarily all add up for me. And for people who didn't read the piece, just like a little snippet of it to see the tone of the kind of critique of Mamdani. He writes of his policies, quote, "They're a yummy poo-poo platter of rent freezes, free bus rides, free childcare, and subsidized city-owned grocery stores that will buy and sell at wholesale prices, and centralized warehousing and distribution, clamping down on those evil bodega owners and private supermarkets that forced overpriced Fritos and soda on the poor. This will be the AOC theory of inflation caused by price gouging deployed in life via a program to reverse ongoing harms of colonialism by liberating humans and non-human food animals from industry-driven food myths that compel us to harm our bodies and, have you stabbed yourself in the face yet? Viva la revolution." So a very mocking tone about the kind of social policies that were very, were endemic to the Bernie campaign. You know, Bernie had a free supermarket in Burlington, Vermont. Do we not think price gouging is real? Because they're in quotation marks here. Do we not think that inflation was largely driven by the fact of the pandemic and supply chain issues? Or do we really believe, and also that corporations exploited that and, did price gouging? I mean, it does feel like a broader resentment with not just a human being in Zoran, but a whole set of left policies that he had previously sort of bought into. And I wondered if you had any insight or reflection on that.
Let me be super honest here. Let me be super honest here. Like, one of the things that I've always thought was most valuable in sort of my work as a journalist and a commentator, an analyst, whatever, is the distance that I have from living in Brazil. Like, I'm not inside the, Beltway social circle. I don't see politicians at social events. I don't see journalists at social events. And one of the reasons why I'm glad for that is because when you develop like a real friendship with someone, it does not only make it more difficult to criticize them publicly, but also I'm not even sure you should. Like, we were talking earlier, like, where do you weigh your friendship with somebody versus like your obligation to criticize somebody if you disagree with them publicly? Obviously, privately is a different story. And I have a lot of people with whom I have good, constructive, social relationships in journalism and politics, but I don't have a lot of people I would call friends, like people I really consider friends. Matt, though, is one of them. I don't think I would criticize you publicly either for the same reason. I have, other people with whom I feel like I have a very, like a real friendship or a real connection. If you became a senator, if Matt became like the defense secretary, the press secretary, then my view would probably be different. But I just, I'm very reluctant to talk. Only one time I've ever said anything when I questioned Matt's work or was critical is another time when you provoked me on this show when we were talking about the Twitter files.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get you in trouble.
But no, it's not that I'm in trouble. I just want to be very honest about, I don't want to sit here and defend Matt without disclosing that is part of what is driving like what I'm willing to say or not say. But let me just say something more general, though.
Sure.
I do think it's a common dynamic, and I'm not even sure I think this is bad, that the way you see the world when you're 20 and 30 and single and, not with all that many responsibilities versus how you see it when you're 40 and 50 and 60 and now you have kids and you're more like responsible for other people. It's kind of a cliche, but also true that people generally become a little bit more conservative as they age for a bunch of different reasons.
Well, Glenn, what if I'm 40 and childless?
Right, as you are. And so that's why, but I want to see like the Brie, at 43 and married. And I insist, by the way, that we conclude that first segment about your dating life as our first segment, even though I never imagined that it would be when we were doing it. But being a father, like, it just does, and never thinking I was going to be one and now being one, like, it does change in some respect, like how you think about the world, how you think about the future. So, and maybe this generational difference, this conflict is kind of healthy. Like, younger people want to push things and change things and deconstruct them. And older people tend to want to conserve them more and kind of create a little more stability. Maybe that tension is kind of a good tension. I'm not even saying that's the case with Matt. I'm trying to like just speak more broadly. But I think you see that in a lot of different cases. I also think like every movement does have its cringe elements. And, although I made very clear that like I support Zoran, I hope he wins. I was glad he won the primary. There are things you could mock in like the DSA, notwithstanding all the credit that I gave them and think they deserve, that are kind of cringy. Maybe that's just the nature of being like, they're generally younger people. The way they do politics is just a little bit unserious sometimes, but that's true of people on the right. It's true, obviously. I think
the Pam Bondi flip-flop clips that people have been circulating around the
The DOJ may be releasing the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients. Will that really happen?
It's sitting on my desk right now to review. That's been a directive by President Trump. I'm reviewing that. I'm reviewing JFK files, MLK files. That's all in the process of being reviewed because that was done at the directive of the president from all of these agencies.
So have you seen anything that you said, oh my gosh?
Not yet.
Okay. Well, we'll check back with you.
All those ridiculous, like Laura Loomer and the whole like MAGA influencer, like, there's all kind. You can satirize everything and everyone, and maybe that's part of what's driving that as well. But I just these are the reason why I think these are things that are important to think about. Is I don't want to become kind of reflexive in my thinking, like, oh, now I'm older, now I'm a parent, now I have kids, therefore I'm just going to like reflexively become conservative, or now I'm more financially prosperous than I was when I was growing up or when I was younger. So now I'm going to like want to be more satisfied with the status quo. I think it's important to realize all these temptations and impulses precisely that you can kind of fight to avoid them. Like we were talking about before about, wanting to go to war with a faction that you think is unfairly attacking you, but then realizing, no, I don't want to have my like own personal reactionary impulses driving my political outlook or my journalistic focus. But these are normal human impulses. I just think it's good to be aware of them so that you can kind of, make sure you're assessing yourself as objectively as possible.
Yeah, well, I only bring it up to kind of laud you for being incredibly
I think you were doing
consistent.
it with a little troublemaking, but that's part of your job. I totally empathize.
I mean, it's not fair for me to ask, I think, about all of the inconsistencies. Like I can get into Tucker Carlson, I praise Tucker Carlson for his consistency on this as well, but then others who flip-flop. And, I found myself, I will admit, I don't have any stake in Tucker Carlson, but I like Taibbi like everybody else. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have any interest in having any acrimony with Matt Taibbi. And I think people like Zed Jelani who've been criticizing him similarly are folks that never criticized him in bad faith, defended him when he was being made a pariah in that congressional hearing, like all of the things, like defended him in his Russiagate coverage, like all of those things. And I think the frustrating aspect of it is that we valued his reporting. He, like you, has been a sort of titan of independent reporting for many, many years and has a record of reporting on important issues like Palestine, despite them not it not being the focus of his contemporary reporting. So, yeah, am I being a little messy? Sure.
Little drama is always never hurt anybody. No, but let me just make clear my reluctance to talk about Matt, and pretend I'm being like objective about it, as opposed to having like a personal or emotional investment because he is my friend for a long time, doesn't mean that I think he's not a legitimate target of critique. I mean, I think anybody who enters the public arena and amasses some kind of influence is a completely valid target of critique, including harsh critique. That includes myself, that includes you, it includes anybody in any kind of position like that. And I think a lot of the criticisms of Matt, like a lot of the criticisms of me over the last many years, came from a lot of people who once really thought that Matt represented their politics, was this very important voice and a brave voice and independent voice, and who believe that he has changed and they feel kind of betrayed. I know there's a lot of people who felt that about me. I think there are people who feel that about you. And you're kind
me?
of
How have I changed?
Not Bree. No, everybody loves Bree.
Well, but, no, not everybody loves Bree, but
I think if you're going to have influence, I think hearing harsh critique sometimes is a good thing, just to make sure you're checking yourself, and not letting the praise that you also get to your head or carry you away or immunize you from believing that you're also capable of error.
Well, the miracle is, how have you managed? I mean, I think for me, the best outcome would be not that you trash talk your friend on this podcast, but that I'm gently nudging you to go have a private conversation. Just go save Matt Taibbi. Go privately. I get it. People I have a relationship with Marianne Williamson. I also have a relationship with Norm Finkelstein. Norm Finkelstein likes to come on here and call Marianne Williamson everything but a child of God. And then I got to go deal with that over an Americano. And I don't mean the coffee version of one.
Right. Well, that's also Norm. Trust me, I've had Norm on saying things on my show that I was like, in fact, one time Norm came on and just started viciously attacking me as a coward because I refused to say that I think Russia was justified for invading Ukraine. And, that's not a critique I'm accustomed to having, that I'm not pro-Russian enough. So, that's, in a way, that's why we all love Norm, and what makes Norm such an awesome guest, is that,
but that's the thing. He's like Teflon. He's made of sterner stuff. He's the kind of person who welcomes a sort of combative exchange. And I think that's what makes dialogue with him so rich, and which makes me feel so confident in my friendship with him, because it doesn't feel conditional on us agreeing on anything. And I feel the same way about you, right?
Yeah, we've had, I mean, this is pretty agreeable, but we've been on many times before where we've like had it out about different, I think the last time I was on, we argued about Daniel Penny we went on for like 25 minutes. We were completely opposite in our views. Yeah, no, I totally think that too. But at the same time, like if I were on someone else's show or I just heard you say something, I don't think I would be inclined to go to Twitter and be like, oh, this thing Bree said is fucking stupid. It's a lie. It's dishonest.
And so,
I would
go to you. I don't
to
want you to say that about Matt. I just want you to go to Matt privately in the DM.
I've talked to Matt. We talk. I think like there have been times you and I have talked about various things that we don't necessarily say the same. I think that's, as you say, that makes a good, healthy friendship. I just think, and maybe it's not the right thing that is not the right approach for me that I have, but I just do feel reluctant to criticize friends in public. And I mean, honestly, it's one of the reasons why I'm so happy I'm not dependent upon this social system where I live next door in Georgetown to like senators, or my kids go to the same, school, the same private school as like CNN anchors, and I'm seeing them all the time. I mean, I hope that I would still be, have the same role, but it does become harder. And I think maintaining a distance, maintaining your independence, I think is really important.
Yeah, I agree. And I do want to give you credit and others credit who do have the kind of constitution that allows for very public, even like Zed Jelani, if I may, there's a certain kind of, dare I say, autistic resilience that really helps you in this space that many of us have.
Totally.
Well,
I mean, that's a good example. Like Zed is a friend. That's a good example. Zed is a friend of mine. We obviously work together at The Intercept. I love Zed. Yeah. But also, Zed and I have had it out, I mean, sometimes viciously.
Same.
And like over days and weeks, because Zed is someone who will not, mask what he's saying. And that's one of the things I love about Zed. And a lot of times, even though I want to murder him and strangle him to death, because of this like obsessive compulsion or autistic, like, relentlessness that he has, it also sometimes, a lot of times, in fact, ends up with my walking away and having to do some thinking.
Yes, it makes things interesting.
Yeah. And I think we need people like that. I used to I got to go, and I know you do too. So I just, last thing about that, whenever people used to complain to me about Julian Assange's personality traits that were not particularly pleasant, and trust me, a lot of Julian Assange's personality traits are not particularly pleasant. I've had my own time when I wanted to just, strangle Zed Jelani and Julian Assange together, and until they both stop breathing and see which one stops first. The reason why it never in any way compromised my support for Julian is what I was saying earlier. It's like, what kind of personality type do you think is willing to go around, so defiantly confronting the most powerful governments in the world and the most powerful corporations in the world, publishing their secrets in a way they're going to try and criminalize? You're not going to have like a mild-mannered, ordinary, kind of cliched, pleasant personality type. You're going to have somebody who is very combative and very kind of just like somebody who's not entrenched in the way society demands that you be, but somebody who has their own kind of quirks. And sometimes those quirks, the same things that make him so effective in being confrontational with the CIA are the same things that sometimes make interpersonal relations with them so difficult. But in the context of things, I'd much rather have a Julian Assange who sometimes annoys me, but who does the incredibly pioneering and consequential work that he does. And, I think a lot of us in this space who are willing to be independent, have those personality types.
Exactly. And maybe it hurts you in the dating market. And maybe it means you're not going to end up with Trevor Noah.
Exactly. But it's just the price we all pay. Nothing is free in this world. Everything has a cost. All right, Bree, always listeners. So great to see you. I feel like we didn't even have like an agenda, or we did have one that we totally ignored, and that's always the best way to have a conversation.
There was one, but who cares? I
don't even remember what it was. I preferred what we did here.
This was fantastic. It's always such a joy. Do you want to plug your
I don't want to plug
update
anything
or anything else?
No.
Everyone knows where to find Glenn Greenwald, who I literally never introduced in the entire context of this show.
But
true. You know who he was.
All right, Bree, it's so
Glenn.
awesome to talk to you. Thank you. I'll talk to you soon.
Same here. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks to all of you for tuning in as always. You know you can get an extra episode of Bad Faith Podcast every Monday at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. You are enjoying this amazing 2-hour free conversation that normally, if I were better at scheduling, would have been half paywalled. So do consider going over to patreon.com and unlocking what is now almost 500 episodes we've recorded. We're coming up on the 500 number. We've been doing this for coming up on 5 years now. So if you enjoy this content and you would like to continue to support, patreon.com/badfaithpodcast is where to find us. As always, take care of yourselves and remember to keep the faith. Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.